Here we are. My dearest friends, I would like to introduce to you a beloved spirit sister, Maitreyi, Yogacharin. She is a incredible embodiment of the teachings of yoga. And of course, all of us have heard about yoga, but there's a depth and a breadth, an ancientness to yoga, which very little of that has come over here as yet. The initial start is here, and here we have an exponent of really the full spectrum and depth and embodiment of these teachings, which are vast and deep, and I feel personally exactly right for this moment, even more so now than ever before. So please let me introduce you to my friend here. Welcome.
Namaste. Thank you for having me here, Baya. Yeah.
And we'll refer to each other. She calls me Baya, I call her Bena. Bena and Baya is brother and sister. And we say it with affection. We say it because we see each other as one world family. And also there's a family relationship which we love to connect with. So, and obviously, please, Bena, tell them from your heart what namaste means.
Okay. So if you look at the word nama, it means to bow, but there's also another meaning. Nama also means essence. So essentially, we're bowing to the essence of the other person, not just the form. And also, it's a mudra in action. So, a mudra is a means of intrapersonal communication. So, as we bring the right and the left together at the heart center, we're having this harmonious interaction of the polarities through by connecting through the heart. And that is the connection not only within, but what we express without as well. That's in a nutshell. Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you. So, Bena, from your experience, right, in the rich wisdom of yoga, I want to start off, what is the most important thing our wisdom masters have to say about this time and how to approach it this time?
So, in yoga or in classical yoga, the first step is actually slowing down. So, somehow, what I would say the masters have not managed, a virus has, you know, in terms of allowing the space for people to slow down. Because as we slow down, we have the capacity to reconnect to ourselves better. And slowing down actually helps us to stabilize, synthesize, and synchronize. So all of these are possible only because of this conscious slowing down. And somehow in today's world, we have this, I would say, extra emphasis or this excitement around the busyness because it makes us look important or whatever we attach to it. So when I was doing my sadhana when I was younger, of course, there were certain times, there was a lot of prana that needed to be moved.
Yes.
So there was a lot of hatha yoga practices, but the purpose of that was for that capacity to slow down and integrate and reconnect. So it was not an end in itself. So I would say the greatest blessing of these times is this capacity to slow down where everything can regenerate, not just us. We're seeing all these videos on Facebook where the earth is regenerating, where the air pollution is coming down, where the water is regenerating. So it allows the space for all of us and nature and Mother Earth to regenerate. So I would say that's one of the biggest blessings.
Beautiful. So take us deeper into the spectrum and the world of yoga and its understanding, please, wherever you'd like to share.
Okay. So if you look at the word yoga, it comes from the root word yuj, and yuj meaning to yoke, to bind, to bring together. So essentially, if you look at the word union or communion or community, all of them have the root in this word yuj. So with the process of yoga is both the technology, the process, and the goal of this yoking or yuj of this Jivatma with the Paramatma. So that's how they describe it in Sanskrit. But what is this Jivatma, this individual with the collective, this personality with the universality? And even within the personality, I love it because when I was younger, I had a little bit of a technical left brain mind. to understand, okay, why am I doing what I'm doing? So it helps, or it helped me understand that, yes, we're not just a physical body. We also have this pranamaya kosha, or this pranic body. Yes, I'm not just a physical body and a pranic body. I'm also a manomaya kosha, or a mind field. Yes, I'm all of this, but I'm not just this. I'm also a vijnanamaya kosha, or I have this great wisdom field. No, I'm also this and much more. And then I have a bliss field, or a
No, no,
great.
please go. Please keep going. What's next after that?
We have the Anandamaya kosha. And then after the Anandamaya kosha, we have the Atmamaya kosha. So these first five are called the Panchakosha. So it's very useful to have this framework, because when you see or look at life in this framework, you're not limited, or you're not limiting the perception of your experiences or life to just the physical body or just the anatomy, even on a medical health perspective. Because sometimes I would feel things and I'm like, oh, okay, I'm picking up something in my pranamaya kosha. So I had that context already where I didn't have to negate that experience because I didn't have a structure or a name or a label for it. So on a very practical level, I was like, yes, we have all these personal fields. That's the physical, the pranic, the manomaya kosha. Then we also have these cosmic fields. So it's almost like the internet, because I mean, 30 years ago or 40 years ago, if we told somebody, oh, you can go and just type in something and Google, the servers are in different countries, they're all going to give this. I mean, somebody would have said, you're crazy, but now it's a reality. And that's what these rishis or researchers said. They said that if we have a healthy connection, one to ourselves and also to this Vijnanamaya Kosha, then we can not only download information, but we can download Vijnanam, which is great wisdom. And for me, that was fascinating. So that's why my sadhana was, okay, let me see that if I can download these principles, of course, do my sadhana, not to seek out the spectacular, but can I use it as a technology to realign my life, coming from a place of this Vijnanam and not from a place of conditioning.
Yes.
So for me, that was the fascinating aspect of studying the principles, doing the sadhana, and having a greater or a more expansive experience of myself.
Beautiful. Thank you. Having these distinctions of a grosser body, more subtle body, and then more, let's say, a non-dual or a non-body, and transcending the idea of even body, one,
Yes.
there's even the self in the middle to even wear or to be able to be the central identification of all bodies, that even goes away.
Yes.
And we go into these cosmic and wider fields.
Yes.
It's really beautiful because, for me, it gives a sense of being able to bring awareness to those subtle aspects of ourselves. We get to dial in more and get more accurate with our awareness and our awakeness of where and what are we present to. In all the ancient warrior traditions, the most precious thing we have, they say, is our units of attention.
Yes.
And if
Yes.
it's our units of attention are mired down and are captured by so many forces I'd love you to speak about, then we can't really be free enough to sense the spectrum in our acuity, sensitivity, and also our union.
Yes.
And then, if you will, it's not downloading, it becomes one, it becomes a
Yes.
stream.
Yes, absolutely. Very beautifully said. Yes. But in the beginning, that is the languaging that appeals. And
Yes.
then, of course, there's no differentiation between you and these other fields, because that is you. Yes.
But it helps you dial in
Yes.
to what area could be obscured,
Yes.
fettered, stressed, out of balance. In your work, what have you seen are some of the major spiritual imbalances that people face?
I would say when I started traveling and teaching, there was a lot of bypassing of this pranamaya kosha, this pranic field. I mean, not in terms of the energy, but in terms of the emotions. So that was being bypassed where, oh, you're not supposed to feel bad, or you're not supposed to feel some emotion because it's categorized as bad. So that aspect was there. And also any emotion, or I would say any concept when it's taken to its extreme and applied in a non-practical way, that's why the path is called the razor's edge. Like, yes, compassion is necessary, but sometimes firm boundaries are also necessary. And that's why we require discernment. So I've seen many times where, to allow for a certain unconscious, unhealthy habit, people will take a great spiritual concept and misuse it to justify that pattern. So I've seen it many, many times with either suppressing emotions or projections or being rude or, many times, or being, what do you say, passive and not actually saying no to something which you actively need to say no to. Even in those cases, I've seen people kind of turning the whole concepts to use it in, a way that's not healthy. I've seen it many, many times.
It's like a tendency to swing into one opposite
Yes.
or another. I will have no boundaries, and that is the path to freedom and God and oneness. Or I'll have strong boundaries,
Yes.
and that's the path to God, freedom, and boundlessness.
Yes.
And it's interesting because from my practice, it's always been the art that those aren't opposites. They're a spectrum of play and
Absolutely.
awareness in
Yes.
consciousness. Can you
Absolutely.
share about this eternal principle of duality and non-duality? What does that mean, and what does it mean to us?
So in yoga, in tantra, the basic, I love the symbolism because it's said to be the dance of Shiva and Shakti. So as we dance, or Shiva dances, Shakti keeps step to Shiva's dance. So it's not like, oh, the man is leading. It's not nothing to do with, for any feminists out there. It's basically Shiva stands for consciousness. It stands for auspiciousness, stands for positive change. And there's Shakti. Her name itself means power, energy. So what we want is to be led by consciousness. Of course, we want Shakti also to match step, because if consciousness is here and Shakti is here, then we have all these wonderful ideas. We may be a good human being, but we really cannot exert ourselves in the world, or we can manifest things. Or we know what happens when there's imbalance of Shakti in the system and there's no Shiva, which means you have all this power. It could be money, it could be even knowledge, it could be any sort of position, and we misuse it. We can terrorize the world, or we just end up terrorizing little pockets, whoever we can. So that's why we need this basic dance that happens. In the beginning, of course, there is that seeming separateness. So with the seeming separateness, if we even embrace that, there will come a point where the dancer becomes the dance, and both of them become one. So on a very practical level, I have felt that during certain practices where I feel that union happened because of the clearing of the nadis. So it's not something to be forced. It's not an intellectual concept, because again, that becomes a concept. So that's why I don't talk a lot about duality and non-duality in my classes, because that can just be a long discussion and everybody's just here. They're not in the body, they're not, connected to their prana. Whereas when we do certain practices, there will be an expansion of prana in the body. Like, for example, we're doing some yoga nidra practices. They will feel that expansion of prana, and they will feel this expansion of prana into the cosmic field. It's a very visceral experience. And once that happens, they're like, whoa, okay, now I can't deny the fact that my experience of myself has expanded. And therefore, there are possibilities of much greater expansion than I already feel in the present moment because of my limited way of being. So yeah, so for me, I'm drawn more to the experiential path rather than talking too much about it.
Yoga it's the ancient path of getting out of the matrix. It's been
Absolutely. Yes, it's fascinating.
you
Yeah.
get to see that your mind, if you, whatever form, whatever style, the just even the entry on the path. One of my uh, uh, grandfather gurus, one of his disciples, he said this when I asked him years back. I said, you know, there's people talk about this style, this style, this style of yoga. And what's your thoughts? And he says there's only one yoga.
Yes.
Where you find yourself on that is where you find yourself somewhere because of your karmas. But
Yes.
there's only whether you pick up a book,
Yes.
whether you decide to have a better act today, to live more of the foundations, the yams, the niyams, and
Yeah.
I'll
Yeah.
even share about that.
Yes. Yes.
And even that you've stepped on the path.
Yes.
So
Yes.
please share about that, you know?
Yeah, no, no, beautifully said. Because nowadays there are so many brands. I have so many people coming and asking me about the brand this and brand that, which is so different from the traditional
Yes.
yoga. So I was like, and in the beginning when I was teaching, I just said, I'm teaching yoga. And then my organization was called Arkaya. And with time, one of my students about 10 years ago, she said, no, this is not working. And she was teaching in Costa Rica. So she started branding this as, oh, my teacher's from India, somehow it has this exotic appeal when your teacher's not from the West. And she has this very different kind of yoga, and she started branding it. And that's why the brand even came. But like you rightly said, all these are brands are like differentiating soap. I mean, for the purpose of marketing, less for the purpose of being on the path. So if you look at the Yama Niyama, this was again, it's codified in the Ashtanga Yoga system. Now, speaking of brands, again, we have the brand Ashtanga Yoga, which is very different from what Patanjali codified over 2000 years ago. And the first anga, so he said there are Ashtanga or 8 limbs. And the first 2 anga are Yama Niyama. So Yama usually is translated as restraining certain things. But I like to look at it as conscious boundary setting. So
Mhm.
if you're looking at uh, yama, there are 5 yama and there are 5 niyama. So niyama are what are we cultivating? So it's an active, again, bringing attention, like you were saying, to what are the things in my life that I need to restrain? What are the things or qualities in my life that I need to cultivate? So sometimes people translate it as the 10 commandments, but it's not the 10 commandments, because it's not like thou shall not. It is not like a hard you should not or you should. It's like take a concept, contemplate it, and play with it. So for example, in Yama, we have the concept or principle of ahimsa, which is non-violence. So we sit with it and say, what does non-violence mean to us? Does it mean not eating meat? Does it mean, not saying a harsh word? Does it mean, taking care of our emotions? Does it mean protecting ourselves when somebody is attacking us? That is also nonviolence, because sometimes we think of nonviolence as just what we do to others, but not what's done to us. So
Yes.
it's looking at this two-way process and sitting with it, contemplating, and looking at our lives in terms of how we have reacted or how we have responded. Sometimes we may have responded as well to situations, and saying, can I do something better? Where can I catch it even before it becomes a full-blown situation? And
Mhm.
that has happened to me many times when I sit back and I say, okay, what is it that I missed where the situation became bigger than I see it now?
Yes.
And that insight or that contemplation has helped me streamline things in such a way where I don't even over engage. Like I mean, being an Indian woman, I have had this pattern of over engaging. You always want to do things, and you're taught to be there. At least your mother's like, okay, go run and do this. Like when a guest comes, do this. So for me, I've had to catch myself and say, okay, energetically, I don't want to over engage, because then I can get easily hooked into
Yes.
any emotional. So all these little things become more apparent because of the process of contemplating, because of this process of sitting with that particular yama. So like that, there are 5 yamas and 5 niyamas.
So
And if
it's
you're,
not like a law. It's not like a hard law.
no,
It's a self-responsible path where
yeah,
you're finding the truth of that, applying it. And then as you apply it, what I have found is as I apply those principles, they mature. I find subtler aspects where
yes,
at first, okay, I've become less and less violent. And then years later, I go, okay, wow, just even the way I walked in was like a bull in a, there's a type of energetic violence
yes,
in there. There's a
yes,
big sort of rambunctious guy. I've had to And I continue to practice and I aim to try to be more subtle with that energy
Yes.
more but there's no end to that.
No,
There's
it's
a
lifetime or lifetimes, I would say. In India, we say lifetimes of practice, which is not a bad thing. You know, we have many.
yes. It keeps us humble, right?
Yes, yes.
Tell us more about those yams and niyams. What are some of the other ones
So we
that
have ahimsa, satya, asteya. So I'll do the first, or I'll talk about the first three. So ahimsa we saw was non-violence. Satya is truth, but not just the regular truth, but the grander reality. So when again, when we do the practice, when our experience of ourself expands, then we have the capacity to see this grander reality. We're not saying why me, why only this. We have this, we can step back. It's like a bird's eye view of things rather than a really narrow perspective of things. And Satya is also owning our stuff, where we can again sit, contemplate, and it gets subtler and subtler all the time, where we can see all those minor ways where we lie to ourselves. And as a result, we are projecting that energy outwards, not consciously, again, by what we hold. We can pretend to be what we're not. And that again is, you know, in not in alignment with Satya. So as we sit with Satya, we start discovering all these beautiful nuances. And we also start to see this collective asatya that we sometimes get drawn into. I mean, like many years ago, if, or in Europe, I think, if people were traveling by sea, they had this collective fear that they're going to fall off the edge of the earth. And that was a reality in their minds, at least.
yes.
So because of that collective asatya, of course, at that point, they thought it was a truth or what was propagated. This fear was also very considered to be very legitimate. So similarly, we're also looking at all these collective thought forms and saying, what am I getting hooked into? Even
Mm,
though the collective is saying, right now, the collective is saying this is the reality. Is this really the reality, or am I simply being afraid of falling off the edge of the earth? So we're looking at that, we're contemplating that as well. So there are many layers of personal truth, collective truth, cosmic truth that we're looking at, contemplating, again, refining it on a subtler and subtler level, which takes a lot of courage, which again takes a lot of capacity to face our own fears. Then we have,
mm.
yes, you were
No,
going to
please,
say
please,
something.
please.
Yeah.
No. Well, I was going to say, one of my Dadaji gurus, Swami Kripalvananda, he was from Gujarat, and he was a musician. He was a playwright as well, and singing songs of the divine.
Beautiful.
And then in his meditation, it came to him that even his voice, his sound, there's uh, damage being done, lowering the vibration.
Yeah.
So he took a vow of silence, and I think he did that for over a dozen years or something.
Yes.
And I was just amazed at the level of dedication to be able to take on such austerity, but really for a noble cause of purifying
Yeah.
one's relationship with all others and existence.
Yes. No, that's beautiful. That's beautiful because that is why Mauna is such a important, I would say, yogic practice. This capacity for inner silence and also seeing the redundancy of words at some point and saying, okay, why is there this need to, constantly verbalize things? And of course, as you also know, that words cannot completely hold the experience. Yes, they can point you towards the experience. So the practice of Mauna, I mean, even for myself, I didn't take 12 years, but I've taken retreats where I have gone on silence. And during the teacher training too, they have to have some period of silence. Otherwise, that's we don't, I mean, one of my teachers used to call it verbal diarrhea, you know. It's like this verbal diarrhea all the time that happens with us, which, we need to have a restraint on that as well. Yes.
What's in your heart to share to those who are in positions right now where they're feeling, I'm here for a purpose? They're feeling that they're on purpose and they need or they're feeling they're ready for something. This time is calling them to something greater, deeper, fuller. What's there for them in your heart?
Yeah, I would say just be with that and the universe and tap into it and ask the universe for answers. Of course, yoga has some very simple, gentle tools, but personally, I don't feel I have the authority to give them any message, to be honest. And if they sit with themselves, they will start feeling that expansion into their purpose, that expansion into who they fully are. And that will become a very day-to-day ordinary, it could be very ordinary. That's what I'm trying to tell them. It need not be very spectacular. And sometimes that also I saw in the West. All my teachers in India were very simple people, like starting from my grandfather. But here, I think when you talk about purpose, there is something that is, really like on Bollywood scale that somebody, otherwise it's not your purpose. It has to be like really out there with all the
Blame ourselves into thinking that if it's not hugely dramatic or world changing
yes,
or
yes,
that we're
yes,
it's good enough. No, every single one of us has a very uniquely carved key.
absolutely, absolutely,
The only our key can open something in the universe.
absolutely. And also, when we tune in more and more into that ordinary life, or accepting and embracing that ordinary, so-called ordinary, mundane life, we start feeling and experiencing the mystic and the mundane. So that's where the yoga life takes us towards. It's not taking us to a place removed from here and now, but something that's very integrated here and now in our day to day lives. So I would say, yes, the practices, any sort of grounding practices, breathwork practices that bring us back to the body and help us integrate better will help us have a better sense and also have the energy to execute our purpose. Because sometimes we know what our purpose is, but we may not have the prana to move forward, the shakti to move forward. So that's also important to cultivate and optimize energy in the system. So one is, of course, having this connection to understand and clearly have this clarity about where we need to be, but also have cultivating or optimizing prana. That's why, again, I love all this practical set of tools, right from the lifestyle to the diet. There is a guideline given. Again, the yama niyama are also guidelines given where we're optimizing prana in the system. We're not losing prana by unnecessarily having to remember the lie we said 5 days ago, because there's so much of headspace and there's so much of prana freed up.
It's not a moral system.
It's not a moral system at all. It's basically helping us refine this energetic system and also optimize prana. So, things get freed up and cleared up where we're not caught in different things. And the nadis also clear up by practicing the yamanema. So that is why it's such a beautiful, I would say, beautifully set out structure where we start with that yamanema, and that is applied in the asana. So if you see in the Ashtanga yoga system, we have asana only after yama niyama. So as we practice asana, we're applying this ahimsa to the practice of asana. So am I just looking at somebody who's got a super flexible body and then wanting to be there? One of the yamas is also non-greed. So sometimes out of greed, we want things too soon, too fast, or we hurt ourselves. Again, ahimsa, we're not in line with ahimsa. So by applying the yama niyama in the practice of asana, we're actually optimizing energy in the system.
And
We're
you're
actually,
embodying it.
pardon?
You're learning it through embodiment.
Yes, yes, absolutely. So it becomes visceral, it becomes real, it becomes, that is why it's called realization. It's not an intellectualization of these concepts, where it becomes real for us. And then our purpose will naturally, we will naturally have the energy to move towards our purpose. It's not like a struggle anymore, because all these things, all our bodies are aligned for that purpose of moving towards our purpose. Yes. So
there's a lot of talk um, in certain yogic circles about Kundalini.
Yes.
In certain New Age or spiritual circles, the term is bantered around. So, can you share about this in your understanding, please?
Yes. So I'll just preface it by saying my gurus, they never sensationalized and they never spoke too much about it, but they created the foundation for it, which is what I also do, because the foundation for the Kundalini experience, so to speak, is purification.
Yes.
And a lot of people may not think of it as exciting enough, because it's a lot of, I mean, on a simple level, it's a detoxification, not just of the physical body, but the emotional body and the thought process as well. So if you look at the nadis, there are again different viewpoints on this. Two scriptures say two different things, but in general, 72,000 nadis or pranic pathways are there in the pranamaya kosha. So just as there are nerves in the physical body and the nerves converge to come together, causing or creating plexus. So we have the solar plexus where a lot of nerves converge and come together. We have the celiac plexus. We have different plexi in the body. Now, when many nadis come together, we have chakras. So nerves creating plexus and nadis creating chakra. So all these energetic systems, again, they have a particular reference point. They create a particular reality. They allow a particular transmission. So it's quite beautiful, and they are connected to a particular symbolism. Again, the symbolism is there to tell us. For example, the Muladhara chakra is connected to Ganesha.
Mm.
And if you see the symbolism, it's quite beautiful, because immediately growing up in India as a child, you have this huge, it's like a cartoon, but a spiritual cartoon. And you say, okay, what does Ganesha stand for? Like, he's this very stable person. He's got lateral thinking. There are so many stories where Ganesha wins a competition not through might, but through quick thinking. So he's the master of lateral thinking. So when we're grounded, when we're rooted, we don't have to fight the fight. We can think of lateral ways of approaching or finding solutions to a so-called problem. So when we have those associations, we have the capacity to say, okay, I want to build, or I want to purify my Muladhara chakra. I want to work on, basically, when we understand everything, we say, oh, all of them are important. We cannot negate one or the other and say, oh, I just want the crown and I just want to ascend. Sometimes there are all these new age concepts where, one chakra is better than the other. Whereas I never learned it that way. Everything is equally important.
Oh, it's your left arm and your right foot. I mean,
Foot,
it's
yeah, exactly.
organs.
Yeah, like, what are you going to choose? Cut off your left foot because it's your foot? Exactly. Yeah. So when we work on all of them and we purify these nadis and clear these nadis, then what happens is the capacity for this root energy, the Shakti again resides at the root, the capacity for it to move through a clear channel is much more likely. Again, there are other factors. There's grace, there's karmas, there's so many other factors, but at least the groundwork we've done. We've done the purification, we've done the clearing. We're not, creating a place where sometimes there could be a spontaneous awakening, and because of unpurified energies, people can go jagged. And one of my gurus was also a medical doctor. He said a lot of people who he saw in the asylum or people who've had these spontaneous Kundalini awakenings but had no context and no purification. So, yes.
Yes. Well, one of the things that I've seen, as you just expressed, is that there's impurities that come along with that awakening. And
Yes.
so some people might have some type of, and this is a caution. If you're seeing someone who's having some type of ecstatic dial in, they're having downloads, there's some type of really cool ecstatic energy when you're around them. There is purity in that can be, and there can also be distortion. And it's very valuable to still keep your cultivation of discernment, awareness, and take what's useful, what's
Yeah.
grounded, and what's valuable, but don't get caught up in the phenomena. And so this is a vital piece that all the masters that taught me was to, and it's a warning in Zen, do not allow yourself to be dissuaded or distracted by displays, internal displays of lights, or I'm channeling this particular being from this channel. Those, it's a type of subtle self-importance
Yes.
that we can lay on that, and specialness, which
Yes.
unfortunately distorts the purity. And so
Yes.
we have these unlived things.
Yes.
So we might have this type of awakening, but also there's still purification for many of us to go through, because we're not raised in a yogic society or can crucible all the way through. So
No, that's beautifully said, because I do see that when people, have these experiences, they think they've reached the ultimate. And that's why many masters warn, and even the scriptures warn us of the siddhis. So we may have powers, we may be able to have very many psychic, kind of powers as well might come to us. We may be able to predict the future or tap into the past, but that is not a sign of purified beingness. It's just one level out there. So
it's
yes, rightly
deep,
said.
and it's not necessarily enlightenment.
No, it's not.
No, you can have deep perception, you can have insight, you can have intuitions that seem extraordinary, or how would
Yes,
they know? And
yes,
this has been mistakenly identified or connected up with enlightenment or deepening of wisdom. And
absolutely.
all the great yogic, all the great wisdom teachings always point to the fact that the wisdom masters are the ones that continuously release the boons of perception that they get. They
Yes,
let go of the
yes,
powers that they're receiving,
yes, yes,
and they give it
absolutely.
for the greater service. Can you
Yes.
share more about that? Because I think in this time and age, this the we need. I'd love you to speak to power in all its forms.
Yes. So if you look at, I mean, or one of my gurus described it as the rungs of the ladder. So we obviously, when we're climbing, I mean, it's not like one is better than the other, but when we do climb the ladder, we can hold on to the lower rung, however exotic or exciting it seems. And sometimes what happens is there is an attachment. And again, it comes from not purifying. When we work with the yama niyama, if you've done the deeper work, we start seeing our attachment not just to people or things or ideas or concepts, but most importantly, this power, this wanting to seem power, because we cannot actually come to terms with our own humanness. And that's why the yoga actually makes you so much more comfortable being human and vulnerable, and feeling it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to like lay on the floor and cry like a baby. It's okay to do all these things, because this is the gift of being tender. This is the gift of rebirthing. This is the gift of being soft. And it's not just the hard path, because sometimes I've seen in some schools, the yoga is misinterpreted as very disciplined and very hard, which is wonderful. But there has to be that polarity of softening in self. And that's where the loosening, in that softening, the loosening of the attachment takes place, especially this attachment to power. Otherwise, it's going for the goal. It's very left-brained in that sense. And yes, so there are, all my teachers spoke about this, you know, attachment to power, and they gave lectures in it. Again, for me, like I said, the approach I take is, yes, I talk about it a little bit, but mostly I allow people to experience their vulnerability and get comfortable with their humanness. And then you say there's nothing more beautiful than feeling who you fully are. And that is true power. And once that true power is experienced, where you can say, this is what my needs are, I'm afraid now, I don't want to go into that space, but I will build my strength, and then I will take care of that goal, or I will do this, or I will do that. When we can be truly truthful, have the satya and honesty with ourselves, then there's no need to hanker for an external power. There's
Yeah.
no need to pretend to be something that we're not. So I feel that's an automatically, it happens as a result of the commitment to the practice of yama niyama. And I've seen it many, many times. There have been, I don't know if it's a guy thing, but sometimes it's for men, they've not had this, I would say, permission. They've not been given permission to actually be vulnerable, at least women. That way, you're not shamed in society for crying, or shamed. I'm talking about old school. Now, of course, it's it's okay, at least for men to cry. But old school
Yes.
principle was like, you have to be strong, you have to be in your power always. And that's what gave you the sense of being enough. And once you are able to drop that and say, no, I'm still enough without this external assertion of power, then again, we can fully become who we are meant to be. So I would say, yeah, the guys have a little bit of a difficult time, but they arrive there still with the practice. Not all of them. There are very, like my group, there are men who are quite like, they have a nice polarity. So, but I do find that a little bit.
Oh, we can be sometimes thicker. I know I can be for sure. What's something in this day and age in yoga? What's one of the most essential things that's perhaps is being missed? You can shed light on.
Yeah, that's a really good. There's so many things that are being missed. I mean, I was just laughing about it because there's such a unidimensional approach to yoga, which I found when I was saying I haven't gone to as many classes outside of what I teach, but sometimes I do like to go and attend. And the exercise part is, or the hatha yoga part is really well taught here in terms of the alignment, in terms of, just being aware of the, I wouldn't even say aware of the body, in terms of the instructional part of it, where uh, the instruction of doing a particular process is given really well. But there are other parts that are so key to yoga that are being missed. For example, the breath always has to drive the movement in yoga. This is even on a practical class level. I'm not even talking about all these different koshas and being able to integrate it in the class and the yama niyama, none of that. On a very practical level, if the breath is not driving the movement, then we are tapping into this old exercise paradigm of push. Whereas the yogic paradigm is, how do we pace ourselves?
Mm,
So once we learn how to pace ourselves, the class becomes a structure for life. Once we learn to tune in and say, okay, this is where I'm at, can I still have a deepening and a lengthening of my breath in this practice? If not, what is in me, maybe in my shoulders or in my hips, that is stuck, which is not allowing for that opening? So that's something to look at and be with. So these points of physical and energetic awareness help us not just pace the class, but pace our lives as well. So that I would say is one key thing that is being missed. That paradigm shift doesn't happen in a regular, I would call it yoga exercise. That's why I would say in the West, it's good yoga exercise, but it's not yoga where there's a paradigm shift in the mind that takes place.
this is really valuable, I feel, for everyone to understand the depths and layers it's an art, it's a skill, and it's a way of life.
Yes.
And martial arts. I grew up in kung fu, and now I'm studying Brazilian jiu-jitsu and other martial arts. And it's a yoga, it's its own form,
Yes.
and it's particularly meant and designed for those who have more of a warrior disposition.
Absolutely. Yes.
Can you share about from the yogic philosophy these different dispositions, and just so that we all can, as we listen, we can start feeling into where perhaps am I uh, in this space of disposition.
Wonderful. So like in the practices, we have a whole set of practices called the Kshatriya Kriya. And Kshatriya, as you know, is the warrior race. So with those practices, we are using a lot of the diaphragmatic movement. For example, one of them, actually you're punching and you're using the diaphragm in a sound called the ha. So it's like a ha, and you're sitting on your toes. So you're basically sitting on your heels and your toes, and puts pressure on the nerve endings at the tips of the toes. So sometimes it can be excruciatingly painful. And I was very drawn to it 20 years ago. In my 20s, I was very drawn to those practices. And because I was like, okay, how do I like really be assertive, and how do I really learn to say no, and how do I do that? That was what drew me. So I also feel that these dispositions need not be kind of rigid. They can be fluid depending on the age and stage of our lives as well. So, and if you see again, dispositions, they're also connected to gunas or qualities. So if you look at the gunas, we have the quality of tamas, which is again dullness, darkness, inertia, lethargy, a certain heaviness. Then we have rajas, which is this disposition of passion and, excitement. And but you also have, it can also move towards agitation and restlessness and busyness. And of course, if uncontrolled, it can go into, conflict. So rajas is that disposition. And then we have sattva. Sattva is a still alertness. So ideally, the gurus are telling you, yes, all of this is great, but you want to cultivate more of sattva so you can actually listen to what I'm saying. My teacher used to say, these two dispositions, you're just going to be sleeping. So with tamas, of course, the tamasic person is going to be dull and nothing is going to go into the mind, or the body is also not receptive enough because a lot more detoxification is needed for even energetic receptivity for a tamasic person. But a tamasic person and a sattvic person look similar from outside. The rajasic in between person who's got this passion and on the other extreme aggression, you can make out because they can't sit still. There's a certain bodily restlessness. Sweet. There's a certain restlessness that's in the body. So you can immediately make them out. So when you see a particular thing unfolding, we're also seeing from what disposition the person is coming from. So for example, if a person is naked, they could be, if they're tamasic, then they're completely mad, or they're just not in coherence, or they're sattvic. And there are many, many very enlightened masters who just decided, I don't, they call them digambaris, which is a beautiful poetic way of saying they were only clothed by the sky. There's nothing else clothing them but the sky. So they were also naked, but that was a totally different consciousness from where they came from. So when there is a particular activity or action we are doing, we're seeing from which disposition we're coming from. Or if you're rajasic, maybe, it's like flaunting the body. I don't know. There could be, some element of that when, the same action is with a rajasic person. So you're looking at all these different dispositions. And again, that's why the contemplation of the niyama niyama is important, because we apply that here too. We have the Sakshi Bhava. Sakshi Bhava is a witnessing of self, where we become the witness and we say, okay, where is this coming from? And therefore, we can shift it towards a more sattvic way of being. So, yeah, that's in a nutshell the dispositions.
Beautiful. Any one of these, we could just go in and
Yes.
open up and expand on.
Expand on. Yeah. They're just, each of them is so beautiful and helps us to blossom into a blessing when we fully embrace any of them and move through them. Yes.
Bena, what's your share to all our friends from your heart?
Are we coming to the end of the
Yes.
okay, fantastic. Yeah. So I just wanted to say that it was wonderful meeting you through Ross. So that was, I still remember when you came to the first session. That was the first time, or I think the last time also, possibly I met you in a practice space, and then we've been bumping into each other. So that heart connection has been there. So thank you very much for inviting me. And I think, that resonance is what I feel with people when I meet them, not just with you, but with others and the community. And Vancouver has been really beautiful that way. Those who are the simple, beautiful souls have been drawn to the practice, who want to understand the deeper dimensions, have come into the practice. And I feel truly grateful for being in this beautiful land. Yeah.
Bena, how can our friends get a hold? You're doing trainings now that you've now
Yes.
put online. How can they get a hold of you?
They can go to arkaya.net, arkaya.net. And every Saturday we have a community. Anybody can drop in on Zoom from 11 to 1 o'clock. So it's just a simple class, understanding the foundational principles, where one of those in the teacher training, they do the practicums So they will teach the 1 hour. Then the next hour, I will teach deepening practice in terms of a reconnection, uh, discussing certain concepts for contemplation, and then some question and answer, and then just the community getting together. So it's the simple good things in life.
And it's so beautiful. I'll make sure there's a link in our comments for
Oh,
everyone.
thank you.
Friends, please come to this because, especially during this time as warrior sages, it's so valuable to center in the body, center in spirit. And here we have a wonderful guide and mentor to be able to take you to that depth. Thank you, Benna, so much for today.
Thank you so
Namaste.
much. Thank you for having me. It was wonderful.
Thank you, friends. And there's so much richness here. I hope you dive into the essence of yoga with more care and openness and inquiry. Good night.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bless.